This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for How to Superage with Elise Marie Collins. And interestingly enough, even though we have a guest every time, uh, it's the middle of July, actually the end of July. People are busy, and Elise was out in New York gathering up her son, bringing him home. So we decided today the two of us are going to talk, and we're going to talk about her book, Superager. And uh, I don't know how you intended initially, Elise, when you wrote this, that people would read it, if they would just pick it up and read it from front to back, because that's how we read most books. But I don't read self care books that way. And this is definitely a self care book. Typically, I just open it up, and wherever it opens, that's what I read. And yesterday, I opened it up to a section. And for those of you who have the book, you may want to open it up right now. It's in chapter 4, and it says 20 years younger. And my first reaction was, wow, that would be really great. And then I thought about it, and it's like, I don't want to go through all that all over again. Uh, but if I could have that energy to be 20 years younger, that I would accept. And then I went on to read, it talked about habit guidelines. And I don't know about you, but when you decide that you want to make a change, do you sometimes find that you start changing everything around you? And then all of a sudden it's like you have no energy to do it. And then you fall back into bad habits.
Oh, yeah, that's a great thing we can talk about. There's so much. I have so much to say about all these subjects. That's why I feel like maybe every 6 weeks or so, we can just have our own conversation.
Right.
Yeah. And I like the way you are reading Superager, because I did design it that way. You could read it to cover, but most people just, if they read the actual book, it is an audio book, but to read it, you can just open up and let the goddess, let the universe, or whatever you believe in that's sending you the right messages.
Exactly.
But with the habits, it's really interesting because my mentor in habits, Kate Stillman, she wrote the foreword to my book. She always taught us something that it's called tiny habits. Have you heard of tiny habits?
Nope.
It's a great concept. So I can explain it to everyone, and you can all look it up, and we can put it in the show notes. It was originated. I mean, the idea is I'd say a lot of people discover it maybe on their own, but there was a habit scientist and a psychologist who works out of Stanford. His name is BJ Fogg, Fogg. And I think his website is even Tiny Habits, and that's his thing, Tiny Habits. So he found that, what you just said, like making all these changes, we get really excited. I think our mind gets ahead of ourselves. So our mind is like, exactly, let's change this and this and this and this. It's like you're suddenly redecorating your entire home. But it's so much more effective if you start with something so small. And the idea is it's so small, you can't say no. And there's part of us that wants to say, that's not enough. But it's the snowball effect, and it's so much more effective. So that is what has worked for me and my clients that I work with. I actually have to sometimes tell them, no, that's too much,
Exactly.
And sometimes they don't listen, but they usually come back and say, yeah, you're right.
Well, and I've always been that person in the past that, and I'll use an example. Well, I want to lose weight. Okay, so I'm going to cut my calories down to 1,000 calories a day, and I'm going to do my meal prep once a week, and I'm going to start exercising, and I identify the exercises and identify the times. And by the time I have this all planned out, it's too overwhelming. And that's how I lived my whole life, because I always saw these things that had to get done. And really within the last couple of years, but even more so in the last couple of months, as I'm hoping we're coming out of this pandemic, I've been finding that I have to slow down, because I'm not appreciating what I'm doing. And by doing that, it's like, what can I change right now? One thing. And I guess that's the tiny habits. And, make myself successful at that. And that might snowball into that other new habit that I wasn't even planning on. And all of a sudden I wake up one day and goes, wow, look what I'm doing. I'm doing A and B. Um, and that's when was reading in the book and was like, well, how did I know to do that? You know,
Mm.
but my body finally told me, and you have to listen.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think our bodies, as I'm also a yoga teacher, and I really think that I could just distill what I teach into just that, listening to your body, slowing down. And I always tell my students, and I probably said it before on this podcast, but the feeling, we all know the feeling if we've ever gone camping or even gone to the park, but I think of camping because we're getting away from if we live in a city. Some people
Right.
live in rural areas, so they don't need to slow down as much. But that feeling, sometimes we almost feel like we're kind of humming from the city. And then we get out into nature, and it actually takes some time to unwind, to get to that slower pace of nature.
Right.
So that's what I feel like I teach people in my yoga classes. You don't necessarily have to be in nature, but to slow down so your body can just be like, ah.
And I walk, I wouldn't say every morning, but I really try to walk most mornings. And we live right next to the national park. So our subdivision, it has lots of trees and greenery and lots of animals. In fact, this morning when I went to take my walk, I had to stop in my tracks because there was a deer that was eyeing me and another neighbor with their dog. And it was like, you know, we've taken your territory away, but I better not move. But as I was standing there watching the deer, I realized I was observing nature. It was like I it was so enriching. And I was listening to the birds around me, and so I knew there were cars parked. I knew there was another person there with a dog, but I still was finding that this was mesmerizing to me. And that's what I love about my walks, because even though I may not be in the woods of the park, I can feel it all around me. And it's I can't explain how it's like a cleansing at the end of my walk.
Yeah, definitely. I think nature, that's my, I don't know how that started happening, but that was my phone ringing. I have to figure out how to disconnect it. But even though we get interrupted by phone calls and things, nature is so purifying because our nervous systems, we do have things maybe like past time traumas, let's say, for example. One of the best ways to heal that is to go into nature. Daily interruptions, like the cell phone just
Yeah.
ringing or someone honking their horn, is a perfect example.
Yep.
And when I teach people my yoga classes, is that we bring in, that nature, we let it soak in, and then we want to keep it within us. So I sort of like in yoga, we actually do things like you bring your palms together and it's a
Yes.
mudra, a seal. So we're sealing that feeling, that calming within us.
That is interesting because, as I've told you, I've been to a couple yoga classes and nobody ever explained that to me. I thought it was more like a religious prayer, but now it makes more sense that you're just like taking it all in and keeping it there.
Yes, yes. And there's different mudras to, it's like the queen mudra, because I think it also like joins your heart, your hands. And I do it at the end of practice and I tell people it's to seal in all the light, all the goodness that you brought in.
Interesting. Interesting. So, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, you were just in New York City where it's hustle bustle. Um, how did you take the time to breathe and, try to escape all that? Or did you?
Well, I'm actually going to New York
Oh,
towards the end of August. I did talk to my son, and I will be going to New York. I've spent time in New York. Yeah, I couldn't live. I always say I couldn't live in New York. I love to visit there because I'm way too sensitive. Some can live there, and my son's coming back. I think
he
he
felt the
went to
same way.
college there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he did want to go to a city because there was one college he got into that was more like in not rural, but Santa Cruz. There's a college in Santa
Okay.
Cruz, a local college, and it's beautiful. And I was like, look at it, so beautiful. And he's like, it looks like a camp, Mom. I was like, what's wrong with that? It's gorgeous. Um, but yeah, I think when I'm in somewhere like New York City doing yoga, the things I do daily, but even more calming and grounding practices because well, his dad just came back. That's who
Yeah.
I'm staying in our old place. And his dad just came back from New York, and he was talking about that. He was talking about driving because they actually drove to visit my stepdaughter and his sister. And driving in New York is even crazier.
Absolutely.
And they were saying
Absolutely.
you have to be so aggressive to get in front of cars. And I was like, oh, that sounds, but if you're not aggressive, you're not going to get anywhere in your car. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
and
Well,
yeah.
and it's funny that you should bring that up because my oldest son was in a couple of weeks ago. He lives in Chicago, and driving around Chicago is the same. And I had mentioned to him that we were thinking about, coming into Chicago. And he said, do me a favor. You need to fly. He said, I don't want you driving around here. My husband said, oh, we used to do it all the time. He said, how long ago was that? And we thought about it, and it's like over 10 years. And he goes, please do not. He said, because you'll be exhausted and mom will be a nervous wreck. He said, so if you fly in, he said, then you'll take the train and you don't have to worry about all that. And he lives in downtown Chicago. And the rest, he said, we basically would be walking around. And I thought, you know what? I'm so glad that he really understands us. But he said it's the same for him. The only time he drives in Chicago is when he's leaving the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, so many cities are like that. And I can speak to another trip I went on 4th of July. I went up to the mountains and did some camping, which is really being in nature. And I went to a place where my mom I go to the same lake where my mom and my aunt went to camp. And sadly, in California, we're having a bad drought. And so the water levels were so low. And there's also beautiful rivers nearby. And the reason I'm telling you this is because my grandmother used to drive back and forth from the Bay Area several times a week. And she even lived up further in the mountains from where we were staying. And that just wouldn't be possible for anyone, especially someone, she was in her 60s, 70s, 80s when she was doing this. And now the traffic is just, I don't think it would be possible. So she was lucky to live in this time where my mom would say, yeah, she'd have a meeting and she'd just go back to Oakland and then she'd go back up into the mountains and enjoy her time. And yeah, it was just a different era. I think cities have all grown. And for that reason, probably that's why there's so many yoga studios. Not some of them have closed during the pandemic.
Right.
I've worked at, but we still are doing yoga on Zoom and in nature. I did do yoga at the place where I was staying because we go, a big group of us go up to this place called Nevada City. If you're listening from the Bay Area, Nevada City, and we do yoga outside.
Well, and one of the things that I've learned in these podcasts from you and from your guests, there are things that most of us really know, but we just don't practice. Um, and I think sometimes it's because I know in my case, I always thought, well, I don't have time. You know, I have to, I have to do my housework and I have to go to work and I have to go grocery shopping and all these have do's. And we don't think about, well, yeah, I have to take a breath. I need to get some sunshine. I need to get some air. I need to get some exercise. And exercise for some of us is just a walk around our neighborhood. For others, when I go with my husband, it's a stroll. When I go by myself, it's exercise. Um, but we don't realize that if we don't do these things, those are the things that sometimes are the culprits to aging us because we're not doing the right things for our body. And I feel younger today than I did 5 years ago. And that's because I'm involved in more things. So tell us a little bit about creating these habits. Is that where it would take it bit by bit?
Definitely. I think what I have found is if something, in the beginning, it's challenging to start a new habit, to change up your routine. We don't like change, but then what happens is if the change starts to make us feel better, to make us feel good, that habit becomes addicting. And then we enjoy it and we want to do it. We almost crave it every day. So that's what I found for my routine. When you are on vacation or traveling somewhere, that can be a challenge. And my teacher actually just did a little podcast on that. And it was all about just make it as simple as possible. And because she's a yoga teacher, she says, just bring, really, they make these mats now if you're traveling. If you are a yogi, if you're not a yogi, you can walk. There's many other things,
Sure.
but the yoga mat is a good example because you can get these ones they're micro thin. They're not the greatest for every kind of yoga, but they're a little bit sticky and you can put them on top of a rug. And you just stick that in your suitcase. There's ones that fold up. You can buy them on Amazon. And then when you get to your destination, you spread it out in wherever you're staying. And then it's like, that's inviting. You see it. Because if it's hidden away, you have a visual cue, and then maybe you feel out of sorts. Like I usually wake up in the morning and do at least 10 minutes of yoga. But if I'm not home, I don't always do that like today, but
Yeah.
I did do it. I did, just not in the exact order that I would normally do it, but having something like a yoga mat or another example, which is what I did as well, is invite other people to join you. Or maybe if you're in a family or group, sometimes we're with a group of people where you don't usually get to see and we want to socialize. Well, you could be, maybe you could just do some stretches while nobody cares and they'll usually join you because otherwise you're just maybe sitting static. So those are just a couple of ideas because it is still summer and a lot of us are on vacation. And I also wanted to mention, it was my uncle's birthday. Well, it was last week, but we celebrated our family on Sunday and he wanted to ask me some of these tips and tricks. You mentioned volunteering and doing a lot, not, maybe you didn't say volunteering, but you're very active and doing lots of different things. My uncle and aunt, I think they are like in the Volunteer Hall of Fame or something. I don't even know what that is, but they volunteer at the Oakland Museum. They volunteer in schools. They do. And so I was like, that's really good. And it's also good to tell yourself all those things are good. There was a study that I pointed out to my uncle too. I said, did you know that there was a study on mindset? And this woman also does studies on aging and mindset too, because that's really important. If you think, oh, I'm old, everything is, that actually really affects your body.
Absolutely.
And we can talk more about that later, but I want to stay with this thing that I told my uncle, because I said, the volunteering is so good. And it would be great if you just keep remembering how great it is. So the study that I cited was, there was housekeepers in a hotel and they took one group and they said, the housekeeping that you're doing is wonderful exercise. It's great. And it's making you so healthy and fit. And they kept telling them like, this is what it is. And then the other group, they said, what you're doing is really hard on your body. It's making you achy. It's hard for you. And then they did physiological measurements, and you can guess the group that was told they were doing exercise and you are doing exercise. We all know if we've done housework, it's a lot of stretching and moving and bending.
Exactly.
And it's aerobic too. So that's very interesting. It's also the messages that we tell ourselves about what we are doing. And I'll just say one more thing that I told my uncle, which is the bee breath. This is something I didn't really know about this. Is a newer thing for me, but it's a great longevity hack. And you don't have to plug your ears, but that's traditionally you do the breath, like you can plug your ears. You can even go like this and put your thumbs over your little
Ears.
ear
Yep. Yep.
flappings. And you just go, just humming like a bee. I used to do it with kids because I taught kids yoga, and kids, of course, they don't want to do boring yoga stuff. They want to buzz
And
around
stuff. Yep.
the room. So I always thought, well, it's a traditional breath, but I didn't understand the benefits. And what I found out is that it helps with nitric oxide in your brain, and somehow vibrating the act of vibrating. You can look it up, and I'll put in the show notes.
Okay,
It's like this,
great.
my uncle, this whole video, another teacher that I study with talks about the benefits of this. It's called Brahmari and Brahmari bee breath, and how it's really healthy for you. And that one is so easy. It takes no exertion, and it can be kind of fun. You can do 10 to 30 breaths. You don't even have to close your ears. You could just do it maybe while you're doing
Sure.
housework, humming.
And it's interesting that you brought that up about housework, because I use this app on my phone for my exercising. And I don't always remember to turn it on, but, I try, like when I go out for my walk, so I can, have some sort of idea, how far I walked, and, know that each day I want to go a little bit further than that. Um, and I do it for my bike riding and other things. But I noticed about a month ago, there was one on there for housekeep cleaning. And I thought, you know, house cleaning isn't that, difficult. I do it all the time. And then I thought about the fact that when I do a deep house cleaning, which I try to do once a week, I work up a sweat. And it's like, and it is good exercise. And because I can now think of it as exercise, this past week when I was doing it, I was actually having fun. And when I mentioned it to my husband, he said something like, well, I'm glad you like to clean the house because, our son and I don't. And it was like, well, I didn't tell you that on purpose. But the reality of it is, I want to share that with people, that if there are things that we have to do, if we turn it into a game or fun, it can be rewarding to ourselves. Number one, we're not doing it begrudgingly. And I think when we do things begrudgingly, we tense up, we we just get angry, we don't do things right. And yet last week when I finished cleaning, I sort of like stood back and it was like, wow, that really looks good. Whereas the week before, I probably just, I was done, I was done. So I want to encourage people, and I'm not telling everybody to go deep clean your house or anything like that. But even when you're washing the dishes, that is exercise. When you're putting them in and out of the dishwasher, you're standing and bending and reaching. So, the movement is what you've talked about in many of your shows.
Yeah, and I love the way you're talking about not being resentful and just doing it with a sense of service and offering. And that is also part of Eastern traditions where we do something from our heart. When you do it from your heart rather than, or like clenching your fists,
Right.
it has a different feeling. Even I noticed, try this with cooking, like really love what you're cooking, and people will be like, this tastes so good. But if you ever make something in a bad mood, notice people
Yeah.
they won't compliment you. It's crazy, but it's a great experiment. If you don't believe in life force or prana or something beyond, how do our thoughts affect us? Try that experiment.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up, because my husband typically works projects. And so, some he would be leaving 10 o'clock in the morning and he'd be home 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Um, so meal prep for me was a little bit more difficult because he wanted me to be with him. And it was like, well, I gotta go in the kitchen. And you're talking about begrudgingly, that's how it felt. But he's now working full time. And so I find that right around half hour before he's due home, I go in the kitchen, and even if I'm just making something very simple for dinner, that is my prep time. And so when he walks in the door, if he's really ready to eat, I make sure that, it's going to get done. Or if he's not ready to eat, it's prepped and I can go relax with him and then finish it a little bit later. And I told him, I said, for months, I've hated cooking and now I'm enjoying it again. And it obviously is that same sense that I'm doing it because I'm enjoying it, um, not because, I'm all scrunched up over it.
I was just shushing my dog.
Oh,
Um,
didn't even hear the dog.
so, okay, I know I had it on mute because she started barking.
Oh,
But I love the pivot, and that is so important because so we all get in those mindsets where something is challenging mentally or something changes. I was going to say journaling is another great way to uncover those difficult things that maybe it triggered something from the past or something
right.
like that.
Yep.
So to uncover and discover what is underneath that trigger, or maybe it reminded you of something your mother did, or who knows, but we don't know until we get it out. And I was also hearing another speaker, Dr. David Hoscom, I think that's his name. He wrote a book on Heal, like he's all about healing your back pain without surgery and pain management. And he was saying that journaling is such a great pain management technique because you literally dump out all that stuff from your brain, from your nervous system. And I think it also helps with the mental, like, oh, I don't want to be doing this, or I want to be with my husband, but I need to cook, and that those bits of tension.
Well, and we also live in an environment, and I don't know if your family is like this. I know you live at your parents' house, but my husband and I don't typically like the same foods. And so oftentimes dinner is, what do you want and what do I want, which is sometimes double the work. And I don't mind doing that when I have that time to process and nobody's hovering over me. I'm hungry, or, oh, I see you're making this and I don't want this. And for our listeners, you know, I don't care what age you are, you have to find that balance in yourself before you can help anybody else. It's like going on the airplane. You put on your oxygen mask first before you help the person next to you. And so I have found that the more I do that now, the more energy I have to enjoy life and the people around me.
I think what I hear you saying is it's all about simplifying, making it easier. And there's so many little shortcuts that we don't realize, and sometimes if we do get in that, I don't know if it's resentful or stubborn, we think that, our mind, it sort of traps us. But when we are able to see the bigger picture, then we realize like there's so many alternatives. There's so many other ways to do things. That's why I love talking to you. I love having guests too, because I always feel like our guests give us all these little tips.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
tricks. I wanted to say something about the 20 years younger, because there was something that reminded me of. And this is not actually in my book because I learned it later in grad school, but I think this is an interesting concept for super aging and how to super age. And it speaks to what you were saying in the beginning of, I'm not sure if I want to, you want the energy of being 20 years younger, but you don't want the lessons.
Right.
So there's three types of age that we have. One is chronological, which is our actual number age. There's biological, which you can actually change. And that's something that I, talk about with yoga and the book. It's to encourage you to, not so you live forever, or maybe you're happy. Some people, like my brother's like, I don't want to live forever. I don't care what. Some people aren't really into living a long life. Let's just put that on the table. Some people
Sure.
really want to extend their life. I think the habits that I teach and really a yoga lifestyle helps you to live better anyway. Because
Absolutely.
each day is a present. Each day
Right.
we don't know, something could happen, right? So we want to live life to the fullest, and we want to live longer for many of us. So the biological age, so that could be, if you're just eating every day at McDonald's, you're not getting enough sleep, biological age is going to plummet. I mean, those are just silly examples, or you're smoking or something like that.
Sure.
Now, if anybody's doing all those things, the good news is you can actually really change that. And there's a lot of people you can see on the internet. There's YouTube videos of people that have really turned their life around as far as habits. So the biological age is you're able to shift it. And that's why I think, we live in a time when there's so much available. We can have fresh foods, we can have all these different things. We can learn to change our habits. And that's why I wrote the book, to encourage people to embrace this healthy living so that you live better in each day. The final one is, guess which this one is? Nobody maybe will get it, but it's called subjective age. And what it is how you feel inside. And I think subjective age is very interesting because as if you're I don't know, older is also subjective.
Right.
How we feel. And we might be 80, but we feel like we're 50 or 20 or 30, and it can change every day. There's some days I feel like I'm 80 today. And some days I'm like, I feel like I'm 20, maybe when I'm in New York, walking down the street, I feel like, oh yeah, it's just like especially for traveling. Sometimes we go back to a place where we've been and we feel like it's a different time, but the signs are different, the stores are different. So I think subjective age is very interesting. And one example that I've thought of recently where subjective age can actually, most of the time it's kind of fun. And as you get older, you understand it more and more because you feel the same inside. Or you feel, there's parts of you that feel the same. It's subjective.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've noticed from my yoga teaching, where subjective age can get us into trouble, is people get injured because they forget. And I've heard this over and over because falling is an issue when you study gerontology, fall prevention, because as your age increases, I'm always looking around for things my parents can trip on or fall, being careful. And usually you're actually more cautious the older you get. So sometimes middle age is more dangerous. But some examples are, my mom had a friend, and I think she was trying to help her husband get a heavy suitcase down the stairs, and it didn't end well. But she thought, oh, I can carry it. Because in her mind, she probably thought I'm strong, but then you don't realize.
Right.
Another one, when I was teaching yoga, I remember there was a mom that said, I was just trying to show my daughter how to do a cartwheel. In her mind, she's like 8 years old, and cartwheels are so easy for her. She probably did a bunch in a row. I could never do this in a row, but some people could. And then she got injured. And so I think it's those things that we think, oh, I used to do that all the time. But we haven't really tested it out. So I just say, be a little more cautious, because it's the mind with the physical activity it can kind of trick us in the opposite way.
Exactly.
We want to use our mind to our advantage. So subjective age, so chronological, biological, and subjective.
Well, and the subjective age, I find that I'm there thinking that I'm younger on the weekends when I'm working my other part-time job, because I work with very young people and I'm working in technology, and people who are my age or older will come in and they're amazed, like, how do you know this? How can you do this? I know nothing about my computer or whatever. And part of me feels like, well, I've been doing this for a long time, 30 years. I've kept up with it. But when you're working with young people, and especially young people who are adaptive, and they don't treat you like, oh, there's that old lady who's back here again on the weekend, it sparks you. And I come home feeling, energetic from it all. They talk to me about their private lives, and I sometimes think, would you tell your mother or grandmother that? But it's still okay, because I believe that we all should be this ageless group, that we should be able to do what we have the ability to do, and enjoy the abilities that we have, and not look at what I can't do. Okay. I've never been able to do a cartwheel, so I wouldn't even try doing one. Um, and I think if people will live life that in that way, well, I never could do it before. So why would I expect I can do it now? Doesn't mean you really can't do it now, but you know, if you weren't flexible then, you're not going to be flexible now.
Yeah, that's interesting. It is much different to start something new. There is benefits, but pick the things that you really like is what I would recommend, because just to do something just for the sake of doing it, I think most of us as we age, we kind of feel intuitively, no, that's not worth it, because
Right.
we don't have as much energy. And when you're younger, you do have a lot more energy. I love the way you described your job, and I love the way you described technology. And my wish for the world is that more workplaces were like that, where there was all different ages and nobody was really thinking about it and taught, it was just normalized, so to speak. And why is that so different? But you see that all the time. And I was on I think you're on Clubhouse now. We're going to be doing
Yeah.
some new Cleveland Radio Clubhouse meetups, but there's a lot of great discussions on Clubhouse about aging and things like technology. And I think it's also aptitude. Some people love technology, some people don't, just like anything. And those of us that love technology, yeah, we're going to continue to keep up with it in our own capacity as we age. But there's no stereotype. And I actually saw someone's bio that I was like, oh, I don't think she meant it in a net, to be ageist, but it was. I thought somebody said, she was trying to say technology was hard for her. And I don't know her age, but I'm guessing she wasn't a boomer. She said, technology, I see technology like I'm a boomer or something like that. And I was like, not every boomer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why are you saying that? But I didn't want to, I wasn't even talking to her. I think she was on a stage or something, or she was speaking, and I could have DM'd her. Why are you saying? But, I was like, if I
Right.
ever meet her, I'll say, why'd you say that? I'm a boomer.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to see, and I hope we're going to see generations being more integrated. I think we're also going to see, as the generations get older, because they're being brought up with technology, they really can't escape it. That they will be more informed as they become our age and older. Um, I was very blessed. Both my father and my mother um, really tried to stay up with technology. My mother, God love her, up until she was 96 years old, um, she was FaceTiming with my brother. She could play, uh, certain games on her iMac. Um, and, she could read her email. Her fingers didn't work so well, so she didn't always type very well. Sometimes I'd get an email from her and say, I think I better call her because I don't know what she wrote here. But she wasn't afraid of it. She did it. And then there was my mother-in-law, who had no desire, didn't want any part of it. And that was okay. But I think we are going to see that as time goes on, um, our kids and their kids, it's just going to be part of what brings us all together.
I agree. It's a tool, and it is just, yeah, it will shift and change. It's just something, as a writer and gerontologist, I do see that's written about a lot. Like, I know 65, they're not okay, because I was writing a chapter on advancing long and productive lives for a textbook. And I think 90% of adults over 65 have a cell phone. 65% or somewhere around 60, I think it's about 65% have a smartphone. So it's pretty widespread how many have cell phones, and that's all over 65. So they could be 100. I also wanted to mention one of our guests, she was on the show a while back, Concha Delgado. She was telling me a story. She's an author as well. And she said one of her friends, she got an email from a friend that said, oh, I just read your book. Because, sometimes if you're a reader or you have a lot of books to read, you might not read every book, and it takes a while. This book came out a while back, but this man was saying how much he loved her book and how wonderful it was. And she said, who is it? Did he really send me an email? This man is 103.
Wow.
And emailing. And I love that story because it isn't too late. And he was all excited. And, if email's new to you, wow, just think 103, it's a new thing. There's always something new.
There is. And, I think we all have to be more supportive of each other, because what might come easy to me may not come easy to the next person. I've been working in it, like I said, for over 30 years. I've been training and whatever. So I understand when somebody says, I'm terrified of it or I can't learn it. It's like, okay, I know how I learned it in the beginning, and it was really running down those steps like anything else, just like a recipe. And I think when people, help each other out, we come a long way, and we're super aging. And that's what we're doing on this program. We are super aging. So tell everybody where they can find the book.
You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Audible. It's an audio book. You can find it on Kindle, Barnes and Noble, Indiegogo. You can order it from pretty much any bookstore. Go to your corner bookstore and they can get it for you. Mango Publishing.
And I want to encourage your listeners, because your listening group is growing. If you have any ideas for Elise to talk about, or you possibly want to be a guest, how can they reach you?
You can email me, my full name, Elise Marie Collins, ELISE @gmail. And I'll put it in the show notes. I also always put a link. I have a link about talking about sleep, but you can also just sign up and talk to me about whatever is on your mind about aging. And I love to, I talk to a lot of people about books. I'm also the president of our local Women's National Book Association. I love talking about publishing, yoga, and we're going to have some great guests coming up in the late summer and fall. And I will tell you all about my New York trip when I get back, which will be the end of August.
I cannot wait. Well, everybody take care. It was great talking with you today, Elise, and say hi to your family for us, okay?
I will. Thank you so much.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.